Hey everybody, today I am going to be reviewing Crimes of the Future. This was written and directed by David Cronenberg. Cronenberg, of course, the great body horror auteur artist that I really love, and I think he's made some of the most interesting meditative pieces on metamorphosis, on body horror, of course, often with all kinds of converging talking points. Certainly a lot of conversations, a lot of things to muse about after the fact, after like the stark cinematic images have kind of calmed down in your mind a little bit. And he's always been a very versatile filmmaker. That's honestly one of the things I love the most about him. I consider him somebody that is very perceptive and very wise, and I think no matter how big his ambitions are, he can always find a way to fit them into some sort of formula. He does on occasion return to the angle of bodies and the way that merges with machine. Tetsuo the Iron Man, I guess you could say, but it's more elegant and more cerebral presentation style. And we've seen it in everything from Scanners to, The Fly, of course, and something like Videodrome. That's one of my favorite horror films of all time, and I do consider Crimes of the Future to be similar in style to that one. So this one I consider to be maybe more expository, and it's more kind of about the concepts as they exist, kind of just bouncing around in the mind, I think. Some you just observe, and others start to crystallize and change into something a little bit different. It starts to evolve, and it can be jam-packed with so many different concepts and so many different talking points, as I said, and yet I always feel like Cronenberg is never flustered by it. A lot of filmmakers, when they get all these lofty ideas, they start tripping over themselves, and everything starts to feel a little bit unorganized. But with him, most of the time, he's very succinct. He keeps things very neat and clean, and the run times are, fairly short. Ironically, I actually like that. I like that there is this anchor of the familiar, I think, when it comes to more of that plot formula. And then you can mix all of that with all of these conversations that can feel a little bit like information overload at times. And the exposition, I always think it has a little bit of cheekiness to it. I did enjoy the humor here for sure. But just the way they speak, it's very dramatic, and it's very I guess poetic in the way that they're describing certain things, and it's also very pretentious, totally by design. And lest we forget, I think Cronenberg is also quite meditative in style, which is, in stark contrast to all the exposition that you see here. Of course, I think of something like Crash when I think of him being more abstract. A lot of the ideas about merging machine and flesh and the relationships of sex in modern times and all of that is there. But this one is a lot more lucid. The abstract nature of Crash, I think, can be tough for a lot of people. It is very Rorschach-y, it means different things to different people, perhaps at different times in their lives. And it's one of those things that it really does not assist you with much at all. And some find that intriguing, others find that infuriating. Make of it what you will. And I don't think this film is experimental like Crash is at all. As I said, it is straightforward, and yet that density and that ambiguity, I can still kind of feel beneath the surface. So much of what I saw was very powerful. I look at somebody like Viggo Mortensen and the way that he contorts his body and strains his neck, and just the way that he's lit, especially, you can see all the muscles working in him. And I think the key to body horror is, of course, the feeling of being rooted in the flesh, and I think that that's one thing that he never really loses. I always felt that here. Crimes of the Future had actually been in development for many years. Actually, I think it was like 2003 or 2004 or something, where he was actually wanting to make it into a film, but it just never really picked up steam, and I think he kind of lost interest along the way, but then he came back to it years later and kind of looked at it again and refined it a little bit. And it is what you see here. This is like a dystopian, very synthetic-based future where people's bodies are changing. They're evolving into things that we don't really understand. But it's about kind of the social awareness of those things is something that's very prevalent in Cronenberg. The idea of our bodies mutating and the way that they just kind of do surgeries just willy-nilly. It doesn't really matter. It might seem destructive and strange, but there's very little caution to it, just because human beings don't feel physical pain anymore. The absence of pain, which is something that a lot of people in a toxic way, especially artistic people, use to try to feel alive. It's like, what do you do with that? So like how do you fill that void in a way? And I think that this film kind of explores that in very interesting ways, because the human experience and the pursuit of what is existential and creative, all of that is going to change a lot. But I like that we really see what it means to really marinate in this environment, as I said, and you're really kind of like digging into the flesh. Literally, you're digging into the flesh, and a lot is being revealed through that. All these carnal desires and one's relationship to reality, one's relationship to their body or whatever, in a way that I was just, I was really digging as a fan of Cronenberg. And I just appreciate just the mood and that very complex tone, like especially when he's talking about sex or handling sex as a subject and the grotesque nature of it. He can tap into all of that while also making it very erotic at the same time. And I love that he really milks all of those multifaceted aspects for what they're worth. There is something homogenous and practical to things that I think is really important. We lose the practicality, I think, when we have all of these conceptual worlds. But that exists in a way with like Viggo Mortensen as a very important character here, who's having all of these strange things happen to his body, and he has a surgeon with him, and they're both performance artists, and they literally perform live surgeries in front of people, and it's supposed to be this high art, exploring the things within themselves that maybe they can't understand in order to find some sort of emotion, some sort of meaning. It's a reclaiming of the self, and there is a weird irony of like trying to reclaim one's identity or meaning and all of that through the emptiness of the carnal desire. I do think that Cronenberg has presented similar concepts, absolutely similar concepts, in other films with a little bit more like oomph and a little bit more gusto, I think, and certainly a little bit more density cinematically overall. I don't think that this one is rattling anything as far as when we look at his entire canon, but one thing that I really like about it is the more, at least it seems to me, it seems to be more kind of self-reflective in nature in terms of what it means to face mortality, especially as a creative person, specifically as an aging creative person. And I think that Viggo Mortensen really carries that in the performance for sure. I mean, it's like he's a projection of, a lot of qualities perhaps Cronenberg feels. I'm not saying they're the same person or anything, but I think one could see the similarities. And I do think it's not that big of a stretch to say this is a film that you could see as a metaphor for the filmmaking process, especially, the filmmaking process, but the creative process, I think, in general, as it exists in the modern day, especially when you have all of these fads and all these things that are presented as innovative or chic or whatever. And, it might seem a little bit silly. And I like that they really bring out, some satirical elements there, looking around all these people with the cameras and everything, this high art, or how it's evolving. And somebody like Viggo Mortensen's character, who kind of came in at the inception of this style of art, he might feel like all of this is a little strange to him. He might seem a little bit like an outsider, which must seem very strange for somebody who is so driven by their creative endeavors and, their own philosophies. But what does art mean to us, especially as we're aging, and how does mortality relate to the artistic process? And I do think in this film, there's a big question about creativity and its relation to fear. And for me, so much fear does exist in body horror. That's one of the genres that's always gotten to me more so than I think a lot of different horror elements. But a lot of it is that lack of control, I think. But it's here. It's like this fear of what is his body becoming, and what could it be evolving into exactly? What if his creative pursuits are actually hindering him from evolving? And that's something that we don't often think about, from those particular angles, because there is a natural tendency to, I think, glamorize the suffering for the art and all of that. But I think questioning all of this, questioning why we express ourselves, or how we express ourselves, I should say, I think is very important. Also, how we analyze art. And I love that this film has this budding viscera to it, but there is a coldness and a clinical quality to it always, this removed quality to it, which I think really does help. To me, I think the big thing is the relation to pain. And though these characters don't feel pain or physical pain, I still think it's prevalent in the film as an idea, especially when it comes to like trauma through expression. And what is it about trauma that invites that expression? This is something that's very interesting to me in my life. And I think there's so many different things throughout the movie, depending on the person you are, where it's like, ooh, that's a very interesting idea. Just like I really think for Cronenberg, it's the Viggo Mortensen character that really carries so much of him. I have always loved Viggo Mortensen as a performer, and here I just love his physicality, the weight to the performance. Everything about him, just the way he speaks, everything is very worn down. There's such an exhaustion to him, and yet there's a real kind of piercing intelligence as well, and a spark for that craft that you can still feel in him, even as he's like croaking and constantly like adjusting his body in all these very interesting ways. But yeah, he just has such a great look here. Exhaustive, I think, and really big eyes. Like, I don't know, he reminded me of like Klaus Kinski in like Aguirre, the Wrath of God at the very end, where he's like on the raft. Certainly not that mad or manic or anything, but I don't know, I feel like his features and just so many of the shots of the faces in this film really speak volumes, especially when everything else especially just like, you know, in the mise-en-scene and everything's stripped back. I think the performances here are really, really good. And I think a lot of it is because each person kind of found their own quirks. They kind of settled into their roles in a way that feels pretty effortless. And I think that can be hard, especially with dialogue that is like this, and especially when there is, you know, a lot of exposition. That can be really hard to stay fresh and keep the movie moving and interesting as a performer. But I don't know, I think he just really casts well. Lea Seydoux, I do not know how to say her name, but French actress. I just love her. I've loved her ever since the moment I saw her. She has it. She has that proper golden age Hollywood look to her. And it's just like, I feel like she doesn't even have to act, and it's just so deeply compelling. I have to say, though, Kristen Stewart for me was the big standout. I'm not like a big Kristen Stewart expert or anything like that, but based on what I have seen, this is probably the best performance I've ever seen from her. It's just, she hits the perfect tone of that anxiousness and being very high-strung, but also the humor is strong. And there's real cinematic depth as well in her performance, especially in one scene in particular that is very uneasy to watch. And she actually, in her delivery, she had a very similar kind of clipped style of speaking when she was in Spencer, when she was playing Princess Diana. That character is also meant to be very anxious and very, very high-strung and all of that. But in that particular performance, to me, it came off as very, very calculated. It was just so measured that it ended up feeling labored, but also it felt a lot like a caricature, unfortunately. And I don't know, I feel like with this movie, maybe it's just the style of the filmmaking, maybe it is the dialogue style or whatever, but she found the perfect tone. It's very similar in style, but it fits perfectly here. Every time she was on screen, I loved it, and when she wasn't, I wanted her to be there, and that's always a really good sign, I think. It's just her desperation in her voice and, you know, her curiosity, I think. It's like she's on the verge of tears, and it's strange, but it's interesting. This film, as straightforward as it is, I wish it plunged deeper in the ways that Videodrome does, and I wish it was more conceptually pronounced in that way and also as visually striking. Crimes of the Future does feel smaller in scale, and I think it could have done with a few elements that keep it a little bit edgy or maybe less controlled. I do like the control to a degree, as I said. I think it's like important to maintain a certain kind of balance, but I also feel like when I look at other Cronenberg films, I feel like he's done things with a little bit more edge and a little bit more vigor. I'm eager to watch this film again, and I usually feel that way about Cronenberg's, especially, you know, films like this, just because I don't always know what it means to me initially. But I did really enjoy this, even though it may not be quite as resonant or powerful as certain films that I have seen from him. But I do recommend it if you're really into, you know, that kind of cerebral sci-fi, if you like more kind of artsy body horror. I think this is good for you. And certainly, if you are a Cronenberg fan, I think this has a lot to offer you that you will enjoy. He is touching on a lot of things, again, that he has explored in the past, but he still has that same passion for it, still has that curiosity, and it's awesome. But yeah, that is my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to plug my website, as always. It is deepfocuslens.com. I'm an artist, and I do commission portraits, and I also sell prints of my work. If that is something that you're interested in, you can always go to the website below, and if you have a question about a commission or a print, you can always email me. My email is in the description box below as well. Also, I would like to give a shout out to my patrons who are wonderful. Thank you guys so much, and of course, welcome to all the new members as usual. If you are interested in supporting, the link for that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch my videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.